big fan of questions. And in housing, the hidden question, you've guessed it, is how?
Okay.
Hidden question. And you're all working very hard on making the how, making it possible to have adequate, affordable, inclusive, sustainable housing. And this is very honourable, because when you think about housing, a lot of people would rather think about optimizing investments in construction or real estate. And so it's a great honour for me to be part of the conversation this morning to think about how we can make it possible to have affordable, inclusive housing, and especially for the youth, right, which is going to be our big focus of today. Now, we'll be hearing from 16 different speakers. We'll be going through 9 different national perspectives, and it's always important to be rooted in a local context, because we know that each context is extremely different. And hopefully by the end of this morning, you will all have a much more informed, a much clearer view on how it would be possible to get the youth involved in shaping their housing of the future. But we know that the issues and the urgency is already pressing today. So you're also invited to comment as we go through this event. We have a lot of panelists. We'll have a lot of interactive discussion here on the stage, but we'll do our best to also get you involved. And at the end of these sessions, towards the end of the morning, we'll try and also, properly have a group discussion so that we're able to also shape some of the steps of the future, also for Housing Europe to think about what they can do to support this specific sector for the youth. Okay, so that's our program for today. I'll be obviously introducing each speaker as we go along, but first and foremost, I would like to invite the President of Housing Europe to give his opening remarks. Please welcome Bent Madsen.
Thank you very much. And welcome to this, I will say it again, welcome to this annual conference here. We are going to speak about green also, and inclusive and connected housing for the 21st century. So it's many aspects here, and we are focusing on the youth. My name is Bent Madsen. Thank you for the introduction. In my daily working life, I'm from Denmark. I'm the CEO of the Federation of the Danish Housing Associations, and right now also the president of Housing Europe. When we talk about Housing Europe and the 25 million homes in Housing Europe, I'm getting used to say it's public, social, and cooperative housing. And we can have many names, but what are we? We are housing for welfare. That's the key word. That's why we are here. And we have to remember that housing for welfare. So, as I said, when I made the introduction of the whole week here, the whole festival, I tried to explain why, and I will go a little further here. When we look at housing and we look at young people and we ask them what are their main concerns about life when they're young, and they have to establish themselves to have their adult life, what are they saying when we are asking them in the Eurobarometer? They worry about decent housing. It's the young people and it's the young families. First of all, how can they leave their parental homes? And when they are able to leave their parental homes, maybe they get a rental house, a flat, but as we know, when we look at especially the bigger cities, the rents are very high. Also, now we are looking at higher living costs, higher energy costs, and I think, unfortunately, they have the weakest economy, and also they have some of the young people now who has been able to get a home in the bigger cities. Maybe they will get evicted in the coming year or two because they cannot afford to stay in their dwelling. So we have a housing crisis right now. We all know it, but what do we do about it? And that's the big how do we do it we have to talk about today. When we look at a dwelling, What we should not look at, of course, it has to have 4 walls, it has to have a roof, and it has to have a good quality, but it's much more than that. It's the platform for establishing a good life. And what is a good life? When we look at young people, it's to get near the educational institutions, and many of these are in the bigger cities. So there we have one difficulty, getting close to the educational institutions. It's crucial that we have a well-educated young people in our societies to get well-paid and good jobs, and they can establish, while they're in the 20s, not in their 30s, could establish also a family. And what we are talking about here, it's not only these 4 walls and the roof, it's about welfare, and ultimately, it's also about wealth in our societies. So a well-functioning welfare society is also a wealthy society. And of course, it's crucial for the individual person, but also for the society. The young people we are talking about here, it's of course our future. And what we are doing in the housing sector, every time we build a new dwelling, every time we make retrofitting, we hope, if we're doing it right, it will at least last for 30 years, maybe 40, maybe 50 years. So everything we are doing in the housing sector is for the future. And it is also, therefore, for the young people. So this perspective, sometimes we're not good enough to look at it this way. So when we are building, what we are doing here is for young people, ultimately, and what we are doing here is also for the next generation EU. Inclusion in the bigger cities, the high rents, we have a session about that today. We also have a session about the more digital world. And when we're looking at the digital world, what does it do when we go steps back? And our experience during the COVID, it was, can we live together more separate? And we did. And we also have maybe to take some of the experiences from the bad time to make new planning. Can we have housing areas where we also can have a little bit of workspace? But the more ultimate question we have to think about is, when we look at digitalization, some of the problems with it and the possibilities that we can maybe work from home, and the other problems could be that we could live more isolated in small echo chambers. But also the digitalization has great possibilities to create communities and bring people together. And that is the way we have to use digitalization. So I'm also looking forward to say about digitalization today. 2022, it's the European Year of Youth. So it's timely to have this discussion right now, but it's not only in 2022, we should have it also, of course, in the coming years. I think what we have to say to ourselves now, we have to do better than we have done. Homes, when we look at it, what we provide, homes for welfare should not be a problem. Homes should be the platform for the possibilities for young people. It should be the platform that they can live up all their potential. Every single young person should have the access to education, access to a good, affordable home that's of enormous importance for this individual young person, but also for the welfare in the society and the wealth in the society. So welcome to this session about youth and housing for welfare. Welcome.
Indeed, about welfare and about the youth. 2022 is the European Year of Youth, and to put the focus on youth, the European Commission has even now got a EU youth coordinator in the name of Biljana Sirakova, and she was kind enough to send us a video message to introduce also this event and the importance of the youth and housing for the youth. Biljana, over to you. And a round of applause for Diana, who will be managing the whole session this morning. It's not always easy to get every single technical issue as we go along, we know, but she has done already a great job.
It is my pleasure to address you today in the framework of Housing Europe's annual conference, the 3rd International Social Housing Festival, and the European Year of Youth 2022. My name is Biljana Serakova. In my role as EU Youth Coordinator at the European Commission, I connect with young people and youth stakeholders to understand better their needs and the solutions they propose to address these needs. Within the Commission, I work with different services to ensure that the youth perspective is integrated across all relevant policies. I promote youth participation in democratic processes and better awareness of the opportunities that the EU has created for young people, so that many more can take advantage of them. So many of the young people I meet in my work share that they took part in one of our programs and it was a life-changing experience. Studying abroad, taking part in vocational training in a foreign country, or connecting with peers in a youth exchange initiative can change how one sees things, can redefine what is possible and open up new trajectories in life. This is especially needed and valuable for disadvantaged youth. Every young person deserves such experience in their life. This is why we have made the new Erasmus Plus and European Solidarity Core programs for the period 2021-2027 more inclusive, and we have significantly increased their budgets so that they can reach more young people, especially those with fewer opportunities. This is also why the Commission recently launched a new initiative, AUMA, one of the flagships of the European Year of Youth, a social inclusion scheme offering coaching, counseling, supervised stay abroad, and help in integration on the job market back at home for the most disadvantaged young people who are not in employment, education, or training. We continue to reflect on how we can engage, connect with, and empower young people in all their diversity. And I would like to highlight two of our guiding principles in this process. Firstly, in order to understand and address better the particular needs of different populations of young people, we need a strong evidence base. We have recently revised the EU Youth Dashboard and now have some disaggregated data which shows a more clear picture of the situation of young people who belong to particular groups, such as young people with disabilities or young people from migrant backgrounds. Secondly, we need a strong human-centric approach, which puts young people at the center and involves them in the identification and analysis of their needs, but also, importantly, in creating solutions and targeted actions. Young people have innovative ideas, which are fit for the future, sustainable, digital, and inclusive. Lastly, with the European Year of Youth, we have strong momentum to make a shift in how we include young people in decision-making, in policy-making at all levels. There are already more than 3,000 activities linked to the year, which one can find on the European Youth Portal and the European Year of Youth page. There are impactful actions at local, national, and European levels, which bring concrete results to young people. We are giving platforms so that they can express themselves, such as the new voice recording platform, or through youth talks, or policy dialogues between young Europeans and commissioners. This conference and festival is also an occasion to reflect on the challenges that young people face when it comes to housing, but also on the opportunities and solutions that can be developed together with them through an evidence-based and human-centric approach. I wish you productive and insightful conversations and a good rest of the day. Thank you very much for your attention.
Shall we give a round of applause? It's always a bit strange to give a round of applause to a video, but at the end of a good cinema session, you know, you do get applause as well sometimes, you know. So I think it's fine. I think we can do that. And it's interesting because they talk of in this year of youth, you're talking about opportunities for the youth, you know, to get connected in their careers or in their education. But there's actually not maybe so much reflection on the struggle for the youth to actually live somewhere half decent. And maybe this year is an opportunity to do that. They're talking about how to get youth engaged in political decision-making, in decision-making more generally. And maybe this is something where this sector can learn something potentially, but also this sector can also bring some ideas to this coordinator to also talk about housing and not just talk about necessarily like student exchanges or things like that. So an opportunity here. And now we will be hearing from Irache Garcia Perez, the president of the SND group at the EU Parliament, another big and important player in European decision-making. So we will now be hearing from Irache.
El derecho a la vivienda es uno de los derechos humanos esenciales. Sin embargo, lamentablemente, acceder a una vivienda digna está fuera del alcance de muchas personas y sobre todo de los jóvenes. En la Unión Europea, 80 millones de personas no tienen todavía una vivienda decente y más de 50 millones de personas en Europa tienen problema para pagar el coste de su vivienda, así como la factura de la luz o la calefacción, por no hablar de los desahucios que siguen en aumento. Cada una de estas personas vive un drama que no podemos permitirnos en la Europa del siglo XXI. La crisis del COVID no ha hecho más que aumentar la desigualdad, también en el acceso a la vivienda. Y encima la crisis económica y social que estamos viviendo sigue empujando el precio de los pisos y los alquileres de forma descontrolada. Y por estos dos motivos, por un lado, por la falta de programas y de inversión en vivienda pública para atender las necesidades de las clases más desfavorecidas, pero también de las clases medias. Y por otro lado, por la especulación en el mercado inmobiliario, tanto de venta como de alquiler. Ante esto, los socialistas decimos basta. La vivienda no puede seguir siendo una mercancía. El derecho a la vivienda ha de garantizarse para todos y hacerse de forma urgente. Para nosotros, la vivienda es una prioridad en la agenda europea. El derecho a la vivienda como un derecho humano ha de protegerse por encima de los intereses de los especuladores. Hay que multiplicar la inversión en vivienda pública porque es un servicio de interés general y una obligación de los gobiernos. Pedimos objetivos vinculantes en la Unión Europea que garanticen la provisión de viviendas sociales asequibles y adecuadas para cubrir las necesidades, no solo para las personas pobres y vulnerables en la sociedad, sino también para clases trabajadoras y clases medias. La inversión europea del Renovation Wave tiene que favorecer primero a los que más lo necesitan, por supuesto, y rehabilitar las viviendas más pobres, pero también invertir en la creación de barrios verdes con instalaciones públicas e infraestructuras ecológicas que equilibren las desigualdades espaciales y sobre todo en las grandes ciudades. Además, los jóvenes y las familias tienen que poder acceder a una vivienda asequible y en condiciones dignas. También es preciso regular las plataformas de alquiler vacacional para que paguen impuestos y evitar que las ciudades se conviertan en meros objetos turísticos donde ya no se puede vivir. No podemos permitir que haya un solo niño o niña en Europa sin hogar y por eso queremos que la garantía infantil se apruebe ya. Y por último, los desahucios y el permitir que haya personas sin hogar es una verdadera violación de los derechos humanos. Necesitamos medidas para atajarlos, fomentando los programas nacionales de Housing First y protegiendo a los más vulnerables. Tenemos mucho trabajo por delante y conferencias como esta son importantes para despertar las conciencias y presionar a las autoridades a todos los niveles de administración para mejorar las cosas. Porque uniendo nuestros esfuerzos y sobre todo el de la juventud es como construiremos un futuro mejor. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Much more rooted in some kind of reality. I would say we somehow now have to bridge the two worlds. You know, we have to talk about youth, but we also have to talk about the challenges, the real challenges that youth are facing. And this is what we will be doing in our opening panel. So I would like to invite
Edo Omic, Christian Kramer, and Filipa Rosetta to join me on the stage. We will be looking at the EU Green Deal through the lenses of the youth. Now, we know that there are many political objectives dealing with housing, especially in the area of sustainability with the renovation wave that was mentioned. And this is all going, at least in the short term, to increase costs very likely. And we do also have an issue of affordability, and this maybe in particular for the youth. How can we guarantee that the youth has access to affordable housing in this context? So I would like to invite first Edo Omic. He is senior economist at the Council of Europe Development Bank. I would like you first to give us a sense of an example of a project or projects that you are working on that somehow support the youth in getting access to more affordable housing.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. You just
Test. Yeah, there we go. Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation here today and for Housing Europe for organizing this event. So my name is Edo Omic. I am an economist at the Council of Europe Development Bank. I think I'm the only person wearing a tie in this room today, so I'm representing the banking world, I guess, very well. But I'm actually a researcher and an economist by heart, and so my aim is to work on these housing issues and try to understand what are the inequality problems that we have in Europe. A little bit about my organization. I represent the Council of Europe. Maybe just the next slide, if that's all right. It works. But I represent the Council of Europe Development Bank, which is a sister organization of the Council of Europe, which maybe many of you are already aware of. And so we are a bank of the Council, and we work to promote the social inclusion components of the Council in Strasbourg by investing in projects with governments throughout our 42 member countries on social issues, and only on social issues such as social housing, education, healthcare, and migrant and refugee integration. So we are one of the largest multilateral banks that works in the social domain in Europe. And maybe on the next slide, if possible. One more. Okay, so today I will be focusing on three projects very briefly, one in Finland, one in Serbia, and one in France, just to give you an example of the kind of work that we do on youth housing and to give you an impression of what is being done out there. So maybe if we take the first example of, in Finland. In Finland, so our hosts here today, in the city of Tampere, which is the second largest city in Finland, they have an association system there with the Tampere Social Housing and Student Housing Association, which is a municipal organization, municipal company that works with student housing to try to find ways to fund and invest in housing options. The aim here is a non-profit approach. They try to do a break even in the construction of all their housing units that they build. And we worked with them recently to fund a 10.3 million euro project to create 55 dwellings for students and young professionals to give them access to housing in this university town. What was interesting about this was working with this municipal company in the Tampere region, which is owned by the city itself. And it's a system that actually exists throughout Finland. Most cities in Finland have these housing associations, these councils, which allow them to actually mobilize funding towards where actually it is most needed, and to work with investors such as my own organization to fund projects that, for instance, aim to create housing that's about 20 to 30% below market value. In our project, we were able to get the square meter rent price to about €11.72, which was about 15% lower than market value. What was also beneficial about this system was that they were able to help create a credit guarantee scheme, or rather a city credit guarantee of €7.5 million, which helped mitigate the risk associated with investing in this type of project. So this is a very good example of, if you will, a best practice. Of course, it's Finland, so it's a really great model, and it's something that works very well in trying to get student housing and student housing for young people. Perhaps in the next slide. If we go to Serbia, though, which is a different context, here we work with the Ministry of Education, Science, and Strategy for Social Inclusion. Now, the situation here is very different. In Serbia, there is a huge need for housing for secondary school and university school children who come predominantly from rural and remote regions. And they come into cities and try to find housing. The problem is that the housing supply is very limited in these cities. And often there's a very large rejection rate. About 40% of the students are not able to find housing in a private market because that's the only option they have. So here we worked with 10 different cities to create 36 different housing projects to provide housing for predominantly low-income students coming from these regions, and dedicating 10% of the housing to really vulnerable individuals, such as Roma, single-parent families, families with no incomes as well, and individuals who had very limited connection within their societies. The important part about this project, though, was that Serbia did not have the same technical capacities as, let's say, Finland does. So we needed to help work with the ministry to offer them a grant for a technical assistance grant to help them improve the technical capacities of their ministry to actually design the policy to ensure that the scope and the target of the projects was well aimed and was defined in an appropriate way to actually benefit the most people. So in some countries, it's actually necessary to complement our investments with technical assistance and grant funding to help with technical capacity. Now I'll go very quickly to the last example because I know we're running out of time, and that's France. So this is, again, another Western European country. Here we work with the Caisse de dépôt agency, which is the primary agency that works on housing and affordable housing in France. And here we worked with them to build housing throughout France. It was a 450 million euro investment, 20% of which was dedicated towards youth housing. The picture here is actually of a student housing and youth housing program in Saint-Denis in Ile-de-France in Paris. And this was actually us working with the Foyer des Jeunes Travailleurs, which is really targeting young workers who are transitioning from secondary education into the labor market. And here again, it was trying to give them access to low-income housing, housing that was highly energy efficient, minimizing their actual obligations for financial obligations to housing, and giving them access that they otherwise would not be able to find in the private market. And again, it was targeted towards individuals who were very low income, people who were very disenfranchised from societies, so people who had no links with society, who had poor links with families, if any. And so the target was towards these kinds of individuals. So maybe I'll end there. That was an overview of the different projects that we try to do, and hopefully that can help lead some discussions further.
Yes, thanks, thanks, Edo. Yeah, we can. And yes,
Is this okay?
I think that's working. So,
I can get up.
Filipa, you can get up if you like. Yeah, absolutely. I just sat down, but you can get up for sure.
Getting up.
So, Filipa, you're councilwoman for housing and municipal works in the City Council of Lisbon. Can you tell us about a project or policy that you're working on?
Yes, of course, I came here to share with us our challenges. Of course, our mayor, Carlos Moedas, just said housing is a top priority in Lisbon, though we do have a very big challenge. In our market, we have social housing, we have a private market, but we really do not have an affordable housing market set. And that's really the challenge that I have on my hands right now. And I came here to ask for help. How do we set up an affordable housing market? Now, we do have a very, very important resource. We own a lot of land. The municipality owns a lot of undeveloped land. And that's a powerful resource, right? So what's our strategy? How are we going to do this? The million-dollar question that John Paul was telling us about. What are we going to do to get this land to the people at an affordable price? So we have two roads. The first road, if we have big developments, more than 1,000 units, we're trying to invent housing associations in Lisbon because they don't exist. We're trying to invent them. We're trying to bring them to Lisbon to see if they can create an affordable housing market. The second one, and that's where youth comes along, is we're trying to reinvent the cooperative movement. with youth. And what are we going to do? We have about 1,000 units that we're going to set out. We're going to have a call for young people, 1,000 units to say, we're going to give you the land for 90 years, 90, and you build. This is what we're going to do. We're now choosing the land, the plots of land. We're going to have a call for all our youth to say, take the land for 90 years and you build. And how are we going to choose the people to match the land? That's going to be the challenge, yes, because we're going to have 1,000 houses and probably about 5,000 or 6,000 people wanting to come and build these houses. And that's, I think, where our innovation might come along. We're going to ask for people to get inside a platform, and they're going to tell us the criteria for choosing these people, for choosing these houses. We're going to build the criteria for choosing the people who are going to design the houses and reinvent the cooperative movement with them. They're going to be part of the policy. It's going to be a co-governance type of situation. And that's going to be a challenge. But you're going to say, this is going to be so wide. You know, how are these people, we're probably going to have about 5,000, 6,000 young people giving us ideas. How are you going to bring this all together into one policy? We have three groups of criteria by which we're going to evaluate them. Economical sustainability. So they need to prove that they are a sustainable group of people that really want to do this. They're going to tell us the economic model behind the building and maintaining the building for 90 years. We're going to have the social sustainability. So we're going to challenge our cooperative movement to have a social project for the site. They're not only going to come to build the houses, they're going to have a social project for the site, whatever they want to do. How are they going to make the site a better place? How are they going to improve the life of people around them? So that's the social sustainability part. And of course, we have the environmental sustainability. So around these three groups of criteria, and that's the project that we want to present today, the reinvention of the cooperative movement with young people, around these three criteria, we're going to reinvent the cooperative movement in Lisbon. So let's hope it all works. And I hope you liked our how, Jean-Paul. And of course, we're just beginning to do this. So everything can go wrong from now on because it hasn't been done before. But we hope Lisbon can be a place where, and in 1 year, you're going to see best practices.
Thank you, Felipe. You're putting the challenge on someone else, so that's always a good idea. Great, and so now let's hear then from Christian Kreiner, Executive Director at OWG Woonbouw. So can you tell us about your project to create more affordable housing for the youth?
Thank you, Jean-Paul. Hello, everybody. Good morning to all. Just to introduce myself, I'm of Austria. My name is Chris Kreiner. I'm on the board of the Austrian Housing Association, but in my daily work life, I'm CEO of a non-profit housing company. We maintain about 34,000 flats in Austria, mainly in the province of Styria. Just 3 years ago, we were thinking about what is going on in the world, what is the difference, because we believe that collecting and building brick over brick is not enough. Right now, a lot of objects and a lot of projects are going into modules. But 3 years ago, we started with research and develop on what we called first flex living, flexible living. So we thought about how can we provide flexible living through the next decades, which means if somebody comes to a city to study, he or she has to start within a small apartment, like a module of 25 square meters. And within the first semesters, you got to know something you want to move together. So you take a second module, like the additional 25 square meters, and you have a 50 square meters apartment. Then you find out everything is okay with the partner. There might be getting a little bit of family. So let's take a third one. or a fourth one, and all in all you have like 100 square meters. Then you get a child or children, and now we take a jump 18 years later. One of the children wants to go away from Graz, from the university, and the living standard and the living capital, because Graz is a nice city, but I want to study in Munich, or I want to study in Helsinki. And for that reason, you can remove one of the modules and you take it on your shoulders like a snake with a house. And you put it into a terminal, and that's the way that we thought about, which means that we dividing construction from extension. First of all, in our company, we started for the idea with 150,000 euro. Then we we increased it up to 600,000, and right now we have a budget for about 5 million euros within the project. And ending with September 21, we had the module over here. So you can see what it started. You have a ground, you have the terminal, what we call, and then you have the modules. And you can bring in the modules, starting with the basic module, and you can extend it. Can you take another slide, please? Next one. That was the prototype that we proved. It was a two module and a single module for student living and for small living. And that was where we proved that it really works, because the prototype was approximately 40 kilometers away from the city of Graz, and then we removed it and we bring it into the project that we erected in the city of Graz. You can see it is on just a vehicle to roll on, and it worked very well. So the idea, all in all, is that we are going to bring it in a serial production, which means that, especially for young people, the costs will increase because of the economy of scale. The more modules you produce, the cheaper they will be. And just before the crisis, in our experience, in our feeling, and we proved it with the first project, which was more expensive for sure because it started, but it's about 1,900 euros per square meter, which makes a module of 25 square meters to buy with 45,000 euros. And the most important is that you can rent it, you can buy it, or you can lease it. And the specialty of Austrian housing is that we are not only working for like the least 15% of the poorest people. We provide housing for 2/3 of the Austrian population. And starting with that kind of modeling, it's possible just to start for the middle class. Then after some years, you can renew it and you have it for social housing. And in the third way, you have it for the poorer people, because you have a decrease of rent throughout the living time that approximately will be 40 years. I think that's an overview, and I'm looking forward to get questions. And I think it's a module for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. So we've heard three different approaches. Obviously, funding, always important, co-decision, and then infrastructure, flexible infrastructure. On a political level, when we're talking about housing, there are big initiatives trying to look at how housing is contributing towards decarbonization. There's a big renovation wave. So a lot of investments will be going into this specific part. Is this to the benefit of the youth? Or would you say there is a risk that it will be displacing resources and actually creating greater exclusion? Because yes, maybe the buildings become more sustainable, but there's not enough people able to live in them. I'd like to get a comment from you. Maybe Felipe first.
Well, I think we never have to make these type of choices, Paul. We really don't. It doesn't really, because I think we should never choose between sustainability, environmental or social sustainability, which is something that what you're talking about. We refuse to make that choice. We believe that if we make it greener, it's also going to be more inclusive. We believe that, and that's what we're driving for. It's not either or. It has to be and. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we need to face. We don't have to choose between the environment or the social inclusion. And that's, I think, what our Common Future book was all about in 1987. So I think we really do not have to choose. Our common future is going to be more sustainable, and it's going to be more inclusive, and it's going to be more beautiful. I am an architect, yes, and that's really what we need to underline. And we never have to choose between either of these.
Okay, Edo, are you considering these factors in the way that you're funding the projects locally?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for us, it's not even a question anymore about one or the other. They're one and the same. First and foremost, I think we have to look at the fact that most of the energy efficiency standards that we're seeing throughout Europe now are becoming mandatory within national laws. Even at the EU level now, there's a push towards this. So any future builds will have to achieve a minimum standard. So for us, it's very much so you have to go in this direction. Another element is that a few years back, we did some modeling components, and what we found was that when you increase energy efficiency standards within a country by about 10% or so, which is about the average that most countries were achieving in the last decade, 2 decades as well, you tend to see a reduction of energy poverty rates by about 2 to 3%. And that doesn't seem like a lot. There's a lot of different reasons to it, but that's a huge positive contribution towards reducing vulnerabilities. A second component is that the way we have to think about building homes in the future is that it's not just about building the brick and mortar and just hoping for the best and just leaving people there. You have to give them the necessary supporting infrastructure, but also the energy efficiency components, because one element that we're discovering is having and trying to convince people what are the benefits of energy efficiency for their long-term social benefit. And what we have discovered is that when you communicate that to people, they understand very quickly, oh, this is going to make a payoff for me in 10 to 20 years. It's going to reduce my bills. And more importantly, by increasing energy efficiency and reducing energy poverty levels in social housing as part of the model going forward, is that it helps with the human capital development of those vulnerable people. It minimizes their vulnerabilities. If you are in a house that cannot warm or be warmed very well, you are more likely to be susceptible to certain types of, let's be honest, diseases. You live in a damp home, which is poorly insulated, again, or respiratory disease. This was a huge problem during COVID. If you're a young student, a young child living in such a home, your ability to develop will also be hindered by these things. So there are also human capital components which will minimize long-term vulnerabilities of the individual itself and help them combat long-term inequality. So actually getting the housing and getting it done well and very energy efficient and insulated very well is part of combating not only environmental issues, but also long-term societal vulnerabilities. Yeah.
Understood, but doesn't it nevertheless short-term create a higher cost for living? And how do you sort of communicate that especially to the youth, when you say, okay, the benefits will be long-term,
yeah,
but okay, there might be a little spike initially.
Yeah. So yeah, that's very true. One element that we are trying to work with governments now and seeing what they're trying to do is how are they trying to support youth in this regard, or in general, people who are vulnerable, by trying to provide incentive schemes and to help people with renovation elements. That's one component. Another element is just trying to provide the necessary subsidies to them as well. And one element that we talked about as well is that right now we are in this position where there aren't enough organizations working to provide sustainable solutions for housing. There are a lot of companies out there that are trying to find ways to create economies of scale, industrialized production of insulation and new housing build systems. They're government funded. There's one in Netherlands, which was government funded by in their name now. I'm terribly sorry if anyone's from here, from that organization. But they actually create a modular, bespoke, almost like a Lego system. They attach it to the actual building. And they're trying to increase production at such a scale that this will actually reduce the overall unit price value. They also incorporate the heating pumps, the solar energy components as well. So they put it into the modular component there as well. So that minimizes the cost by about 50% actually, by incorporating all these things together. So getting in this direction will help minimize the scale, but it needs a lot more government support to get that kind of scale going.
Okay, Filipa, and then Christian.
I just want to add also that we really should never have to choose. We have to have minimum standards, right? And that's really the question. I understand the question. It's a very good question. We have this challenge, even with all we're building a lot of housing, and we have the challenge of having to. It's a bit more expensive because it has to meet some certain criteria. But we really need to have minimum standards, and I think that's a very important situation. We had this discussion in the beginning of the 20th century, where you had to choose between quantity and quality. And I think we as a European community, we really should have minimum standards where this choice doesn't have to be made. It has to be above this, and that's it. And I think we need to set it. And I think really the whole European Bauhaus challenge is about that. It's really not lowering the standards, really welcoming all the challenges that come from the energy costs and not lowering the standards. And I think that's what European identity is really all about. So I hope we keep it.
Okay, thank you. Christian.
When I came into the social housing company, which is 24 years ago, I decided that energy is something very important, and I made it in charge for the chiefs. And at the beginning of the 2000 years, we started to renovate our stock. And everything on policy is very good, but somebody has to start with it. You have to do it, because the sooner you get the better levels in energy. We saw yesterday the level that is used in Germany and in Austria with the A, B, C, D level, and the older buildings, approximately the 70s and 80 years buildings, they are normally at E level. So through renovating, you can, and decarbonization, sorry, you can prove that you get down to a C level or a B level. And that's the most important. And for new buildings, we have to think about in life cycle. The old saying is, you start with 30 years and then you have every 20 years the renovation time. So on that, if you start with a better isolation, but it's not the plastic that we used to bring on the buildings like 20 years ago. And our head is in a circle to change our minds as well. Because that kind of isolation that we used 15, 20 years ago, that is high energy product and it's waste material after 20 years. So out of that, it's the most important objects that we bring for the youth people, the life circle. And right now we're thinking about, for example, in new buildings, to build also cisterns, because a problem will be water. It's not only the heating, it's also the cooling. And for the cooling, you need water because the shadowing of a project, an object, will be outside, which means that we need more trees around the ground. So you have a natural shadow. And to get the trees growing, you need the water. And all the water that we get right now is lots and really lots of water, which is not able to sink into the ground, it runs away. So if you collect the water, then you can do what we call a nice living area. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions or comments in the audience? We have one here. I think I'm going to try and do this myself. I'll run. It's a little bit of sport, but it's fine. Sorry. Please introduce yourself.
Hiya, my name's Hugh. I'm from Cardiff.
representing an organization called Tyfres, which is a new youth housing association with developing Wales based on the now Finnish model. I had a question for you, Philippa. I was blown away by what you were saying. It's so exciting. I guess my question is around your aspirations for the social impact of empowering so many young people. What do you see, apart from solving the immediate problem, housing young people, what do you see as the benefits of empowering young people in the way you propose?
Thank you for the question. I must also add that I also teach at university before I was elected, and I'm an architect, but I was also a professor. So I was always around young people, and I love it. And I know, what do I know from teaching? I was teaching before I was elected. I've been teaching for 15 years. And what I know is that young people do the impossible because they don't know it's impossible. And that's really true. And that's really true. I've learned this. That's why I empower them so much, their decisions, even the young people that work with me, and because I know they can see things in a way that I cannot anymore. So I need to believe that they are going to give us paths. And when I have this extraordinary opportunity now that the councilwoman to actually have a decision I have the power to make this path. I always thought this was going to be a very interesting possibility. The interesting part is that I'm not quite sure exactly what the outcome is. Besides, I'm going to provide housing, but I want to do it in the more empowering way possible, because we really do need to reinvent the future. This is just not a phrase. No, we really do need to do this, and young people are the ones that are going to tell us how. I believe this. So we have to have some kind of guidelines, and that's why we put together the economic sustainability, social sustainability, environmental sustainability. So you need to have an economic model that's really to prove that you're able to build, that you're able to maintain for 9 years. But I think that we are really excited to see what can happen after this. So I think it's going to have a very social impact even on the grounds, because our land is also next to neighborhoods that have some problems, some of the land. So I think we can have an extraordinary impact also on these neighboring territories. And that's why we asked them to have a social project associated with this. So these are central lands. So our lands are very central in Lisbon. It's not periphery, but they are close to some neighborhoods that have some problems. And I think that the connection is going to be beautiful. I'm not quite sure. I cannot promise, but I think we're gonna go for it.
Thank you. We have one more here.
Hello, my name is Sandra Campos. I belong to the Filipe Roseta's office at the City Council. My question is, the 904 square meter you said about Cuba project. So that includes the infrastructure and concrete and the surrounding public space environment around, or just the Cuba, those units?
That will include everything without the ground. So it's the erection costs and also the infrastructure around. But the ground itself is different in different countries, different cities. So for example, in Munich, you pay like 4 times for the ground as you pay in Vienna, or 7 times in Graz. Approximately, that might be a difference in rent of about 2 to 3 euro, which if you're going to rent the module and the terminal, which is divided, but all in all, what we call a warm rent, which means it includes a maintenance cost, it includes heating and the VAT. For example, in Graz, you're right now at about 12 euro per square meter, which is very affordable, even for the young people. If you go to Vienna, where we search for ground right now, to prove it, we have 4 additional projects right now in pipeline. So that might be then 14, 15 euro per square meter, which is quite a nice price. Does it answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so just before we wrap up, I will ask you this big question that you have 30 seconds each to answer. I see that you're all relatively optimistic that you'll achieve affordable, climate neutral housing. That's fine. Can you tell me in 30 seconds whether you think it is a question of innovation, experimentation to get there, or is it rather a question of planning and policy? Okay, you have 30 seconds. I'm going to start with Christian.
In my, well, let's say it that way. 30 seconds elapsed, I know. No, we have to do it. So it's planning and policy, because if we are not going to have it on an affordable way, nothing else will really fit to the young people and to us. Thanks.
Thank you, Christian. You were a great panelist. A round of applause for Christian. 30 seconds for Edu. Innovation and experimentation, or is it all about planning and policy?
Yeah. Thanks so much. I think it's a mixture of all of them. I think one element is we need planning and policy coherence more between countries and at the EU level. And at the EU level, there needs to be a easier way to facilitate money for innovation and experimentation. So local governments and housing associations can access funding easier, because right now it's very difficult and very complicated to get EU funding. So they can experiment with different elements like modular or new renovation elements. So for the EU, they need to make maybe the way to access funding less complicated.
Thanks a lot, Edu. You were a great panelist. That's a bank's answer, you know, everything. Planning, policy, innovation, and experimentation. We'll fund the lot. That's great. Philippa, 30 seconds.
Thank you. So it's obviously innovation and experimentation in planning and policy. So as I refuse to choose, as you've seen from this panel, I refuse to choose, and I do think we can do better. We can be better. And so I think, thank you for the panel. Thank you for the and a round of applause for the building. This is a beautiful building, people.
Thank you so much, Philippa. Okay, thank you. So it's now time to regain your seats. This one's now not. Hang on a second. Okay, this is better. Yeah. Thank you so much. And we will now move to our second panel. Inclusive spaces as a stepping stone for opportunities. And I believe all the panelists are here. We have Fatih Vos. You can please join me on the stage. Fatih de Vos is a Belgian rap singer, former social housing tenant working with youth in Flanders, in Belgium. Welcome, Fatih. We have Eke van der Wal. She's social project manager at Social Housing Corporation in Partion, Zaandam. Barend Wint, strategic advisor at Housing Association Leven de Key in Amsterdam, and Maria Chiara Cella, it's Cella, no? Cella, member of the board at Dar Casa. So please join me on stage. So let's talk a little bit about inclusive spaces. Now, before we go there, Ben mentioned that in his intro. No, we have the issue of rising costs in city centres, evicting essentially the youth more and more to the periphery. So how can we create more inclusion when it comes to social housing? Fatih, I would like to start with you. I mean, we're trying to think about an inclusive social housing model, but is that even possible to think about inclusive living spaces when there is a problem to access social housing in the first place?
First of all, hello, everybody. I'm not a specialist in social housing theories or something. I'm just a youth worker. So, but I grew up in high-rise towers in Belgium. So I'm talking from life experience here and a bit from my education as sociologist, which is years away. But I'm gonna try to answer this question. First of all, I think this question is a lot to do with power distribution. And also I want to talk about the theory versus the practice, you know? So yes, of course, in theory, it is possible to create inclusive spaces, and at the same time access to. I'm sorry, my English is not perfect. I'm gonna
doing
try.
absolutely fine.
I'm gonna try to do this. I'm a bit stressing. Can we just? Why didn't you tell a joke or something? What a question, man! Come on, seriously. No, of course, in theory it's possible, but when you look at the practice, you know, in the 70s, when they constructed all these high-rise towers, it was always a very good news story about we're going to create paradise, and look at these beautiful buildings and these green spaces around them. And then, of course, when you look nowadays at a lot of neighborhoods with high-rise towers, the practice shows us that it's not a paradise, of course. When you look at France, Belgium, and yeah, a lot of countries everywhere in the world, it's well, the same neighborhood I grew up in. It was drugs and poverty, and you know, it was concentration of negative definitions, as we call it in sociology. So what I'm trying to say here is that I think we should look at well, there's a national policy, there's the local policy, and there's the housing organizations. And I think it all depends on the way how these interact with each other, and the European policy above that, of course, because on the local policy level and on national policy level, it's so different from country to country, the way they implement social housing. In Belgium, I hear this beautiful example of these people from Ireland. They are sitting there, or no, and they were talking with someone from Sweden who was explaining that there they have public housing that is open for everybody, not only the low income people, they're also the middle class. And I was very fascinated by this, because in Belgium, the public housing is concentrated on low income people, but still very restricted. The lists, it's incredible. The lists in Belgium, I don't know how it is in other European countries. I'm not a specialist, I told you. The list in Belgium, it's incredible. You have to wait for years. I have a friend who in my city, he's waiting on he went last week and applied for a social, he's really poor. He has no job, he's disabled. He's really in a very precarious situation. He lives in, right now, it's really dump. And he applied, and the worker told him, yeah, it's cool, you only have 10 years to wait. I mean, and
that was good news. Like it wasn't 20.
I'm exaggerating, of course. It was not good news, but the social worker really calmly said, "Yeah, but look here, I put you on a list, and it's going to take about 10 years. So just wait a little." So you see, but so there's a very big problem in Belgium when related to access to public housing, and at the same time on the political level. You also have this. I don't want to attack anybody in here, but on the political level in Belgium, the right is growing and growing, in a lot of on a lot of political levels, and they are restricting access to. They want to restrict access to public housing by saying things like, "Yeah, we should restrict the access to public housing for people who don't know enough Dutch." For example, and stuff like that, you know. So that's totally contradictory to the reality of life, because so you see, I don't know if I'm answering to your question. All I'm trying to say is, in practice, we have these huge urgent matters we need to resolve, and if we resolve these matters, we can talk about inclusivity, but. That's a bit what I'm trying to say. But of course, in theory, it's possible. If the national level of politics and the local level and the housing organizations of that city on the local level, if they are working like a machine, and they are, as Mrs. Rosetta said, if they plan and experiment at the same time, and they do beautiful initiatives by creating housing, by also doing social projects there, cultural initiatives. Of course, in theory, it's possible to create inclusive environments, but what you see at the same time, you cannot artificially create it, because you see this gentrification process going on in a lot of poor neighborhoods, you cannot call them, you know, and it's artificial, because you see, because in the center is too expensive even for the middle class to live in, so they buy houses in these low income neighborhoods, but it creates tension, and the original inhabitants are like, who are these people riding on their bicycles in my street? I'm totally exaggerating. I'm just trying to say, I'm sorry for taking so much speech time. I'm just trying to say that, so don't interrupt me.
Now you tell me.
Now answer the question, please. No.
No, but I think you're outlining a lot of the pressure that exists on building a social housing model that is inclusive when there's actually, it's already excluding so many people.
Yes.
And this is the kind of pressure point that I would like other panelists to react to as well. I mean, do you recognize some of the pressure points that that Fatih has mentioned, Eka? And do you think that is creating, that is creating also extra pressure on creating an inclusive social housing model?
Yeah, definitely. I think you really point out the lived realities of many people, and what you see in a housing market where there's a shortage, and there's been a shortage for ages, is that if we want to talk about inclusive spaces, but we don't have enough houses, you always have to decide who's going to live where, and whatever criteria you create determines who gets in and who gets out. So you're already always excluding people if you cannot build enough affordable housing. And I think that's the biggest challenge. And in the Netherlands, we have a system with waiting lists. The waiting time is about 14 years in Amsterdam, so that's super long. And I think, for instance, in the Netherlands, we have a lot of discussion because young people cannot get into social housing. If the waiting list is 14 years, you're going to be about 34 once you get in, right? You're not young anymore. So in that sense, the system we've built is gonna already exclude youth. So I think in the current housing situation, you always have a situation of an exclusion. Yeah.
Barend, could you build on that as well?
Yeah, sure. I personally see them as two completely separate issues in a way. We have a shortage of housing in most European countries, and we should solve it. But we have the choice: either we do it inclusive fashion or in exclusionary fashion. And with every step we take, I would say you choose for the inclusive way of constructing. What strikes me really, if I look at the Netherlands, is that the entire society is falling apart in different bubbles of higher educated and lower educated. And this has a massive ethnic component as well. If you look at the neighborhood where I live in Amsterdam, it's considered a problematic area. Many people with a low income are living there with low educational level, high concentration of poverty, and people with a migration background. And then there's the choice indeed, what are we going to do? Is it inclusive to start constructing there for young people, to give them the opportunity to live there and maybe in the end improve the quality of the schools? Or do we focus at different locations? I would be in favor of mixing, how painful that sometimes is for neighborhoods like that. But it only works if we extend the housing stock as well, in order to prevent that people are pushed away. And what we are really thinking about as at a housing association, as Leven de Kei in Amsterdam, that's focusing on young people, is that we see that the housing needs for people from different class backgrounds, young people, are really different. If you start your family at an age of 23, 24, you will need a bigger home. But that is generally not how youth housing is seen. We're always building small units for students or higher educated with the idea that they will improve the neighborhood. But the others, they fall out of the system, and we need to provide housing for them as well.
Okay, thank you. Maria Chiara?
Yeah, I will try to answer from my perspective, because I'm a member of the board of Dar Casa Cooperative, housing cooperative in Milan, but I'm also a social worker in the cooperative. So we, of course, share the same problems both in Italy and in Milan in particular, Belgium and in other countries, I think, in Europe. So we have a very residual quota of public housing and also social housing. And it's very difficult for young people to access because of course the waiting list is very long, and also because of the system of to make the list, let's say. So I think that there's this huge problem, of course, of accessibility, and it has to be solved with different and complex measures and policies. But from my perspective, what we are trying to do is to be inclusive, or to work on inclusion in the phase of access to housing, but to work on inclusion also in the phase of during the tenancy, let's say. And so as regard the access, of course, there's a matter of affordability, but there's also a matter of guarantees that the youth can give to the landlords, to the social landlords. So, for example, they do not have stable works, often they do not have stable works, stable jobs. So they cannot give guarantees, and sometimes they do not need long-term staying in the house. Maybe they need more flexible contracts. So what we are trying to do is to analyze also the single situations to make it possible for those young people who do not have enough guarantees to access the market, to have an affordable house for also for a short-term period. And then we also work during the tenancy to make their experience inclusive, and so to make them connect with other with their neighbors, or also with the neighborhoods where they live in. We, as the social workers of the cooperative, support them to know the neighborhoods, the services of the neighborhoods, to advise them when they have to leave our home, to find another solution where it is possible, and another solution at affordable price, and maybe on a long-term perspective. So I think, of course, access is the big problem, but I think it's possible to work on inclusiveness also during the tenancy.
Okay, so let's try and then work on how to build an inclusive model once people have accessed the social housing. When it comes to the youth, and you've already outlined some of the aspects of the youth that, you know, well, their life can change quite quickly. They'll need new living conditions, building families, and that kind of thing. But there's also a question of time. You know, how long does a youth expect to stay in that kind of environment? And how does that affect the type of shared ownership and inclusion that you're trying to build, and social cohesion that you're trying to build in these environments, when you're, in principle, dealing with a population that won't be seeing itself there long term, in principle? How do you deal with that tension? Patty, do you want to have a go with that one? Yeah.
No, it's okay. So what I'm seeing already in a lot of neighborhoods, and I'm only speaking from my experiences in Belgium, but also in France. I've spent a lot of time in Marseille, in the Quartier Nord, the North quarters, which are a lot of social housing neighborhoods. And what I can see is that a lot of young people, their parents they were born there. A lot of them, most of them, are born in the neighborhoods, in the towers. And also in Belgium, I see they already have this sense of, this is our, a lot of them. You cannot generalize and say every young guy or woman or ex has this feeling, but I see it in a lot of young people I work with, young people, and I work in schools and neighborhoods, organizations, prisons, and I see that it's a very important factor of their identity, the neighborhood where they grew up in. So even myself, I grew up in this neighborhood. And when I was like 11 years old, I remember like yesterday that the teacher of, we had a teacher of technology, was a course, and he said, yeah, you see these high-rise neighborhoods in our city, they're a disgrace. It's really so ugly, they should, and I was so ashamed because I lived in that neighborhood. But that I was ashamed of living there, and I remember it like yesterday, but at the same time, a few years later, I was so proud that I came out of this neighborhood. I was like, yeah, I'm from the ghetto, man. What's your problem? You know, you see, so I
psychology.
Exactly. It was like I reversed the narrative in a way. And I see a lot of young people, they do that. They're not ashamed, they're proud of, yeah, I'm from here, but this is my neighborhood. And I was really when I was 18, I left the neighborhood, and it was so traumatic to me because it was my identity, you know, and it still is. I still say I'm from that neighborhood, even though for half of my life I left it. So yes, I think what I'm trying to say is you can do something with that. You can use this sense of identity within young people, sense of belonging, and use that in a positive way, not only for making rap videos about their neighborhoods. That's cool and stuff, but that's not what I think we should do more with it. Yeah.
Okay, so you see it more as an opportunity then to build policies around this identity. Is that something you agree with, Eka?
Could you rephrase the question?
Do you agree with the idea that you can build policies, inclusive policies, on this strong identity that you find in these communities?
I think you can, but I also think there's often this idea that like young people want one thing. And if I look at what we see, and that's the difficulty if you make one policy, right? Because if I look at the more highly educated young people in the Netherlands, they're more prone to moving place to place and studying in a different city. And they also have the opportunity to do so more. And if you look at more rural areas, young people want to settle and they feel very much connected, or people from poorer neighborhoods generally feel a lot of identity and recognition with the people they grew up with there. And they don't have the possibility to stay. So if you would say, what kind of policy, I think that would be difficult. But if you say, can we do more with this sense of identity or wanting to belong or staying, then I would say, yeah, make use of that. Because if people feel at home in a certain place and want to be invested in that area, I think that's a power we should use and yeah, utilize more than that we do. I think we often stick to planning with an idea and a plan and a policy, and if we organize houses like this, and then these people can live there. But what about the people that grow up there and that know that place and want to stay but cannot because the new houses are being built elsewhere? Like these kind of things we don't often see that well. Yeah.
What I'm hearing is that there's a different way, a different perception of this identity, bearing in mind that there are different backgrounds, different communities, different levels of education that will affect the way people see their long-term tenancy in this kind of environment. Is that correct, Eka and Barend?
I would say so.
Well, let's zoom out a little bit first, because I think staying somewhere for a long time can be a positive and a negative thing. If you're living in a neighborhood where you maybe want to establish your own life and you're waiting at your parents' place for 10 years, it's generally a negative thing. If you are locked up in a very small apartment, although you want to start a family, it's a negative thing. If you are there with a strong connection to the neighborhood and you live in a home that has an affordable rent and it fits your situation, it's for sure a positive thing. So it's housing policy from the municipality, from the state, but at the same time, there's something we can do as well as housing associations. Lieve de Kei has experience with housing complexes where we house young people on temporary contracts for 5 years. And of course, they have the risk of people moving out very soon, not really building a connection to the neighborhood. And that's also why we try to start neighborhood associations, or at least housing block associations that survive the individual residents, to create a sense of belonging to the complex that has a bond with the neighborhood, with the people that are staying there for life. Because we don't expect young people that are moving on in their life to other places to that start a family or end up in a different family situation to stay there forever, because it's not a positive thing. But we can build on a strong identity.
Maria Chiara?
In our projects targeted to youth, we have one of the problems, or the critical point we have is the short-term rent contract we have to do to the youth because of the framework of the project. So in some projects, they can stay in the flat for a maximum 18 months. Sometimes it can be also 3 years. And of course, this is maybe for someone, it can be an opportunity because maybe he needs a house for a shorter period because he has a flexible need, let's say. But sometimes it can be a problem. It can be a problem both for to his housing needs, to respond to his housing needs, but also for the theme of the issue of rootedness in the neighborhood, in the building. And so the sense of attachment, maybe not identity, but care and attachment to the place where he lives. So what we try to do is, as social landlords, is to stay and to be present and to support young people, and not just young people, to leave the place, to interact with the neighbors. And sometimes we also have, we can use common spaces in the buildings we manage to foster and to facilitate connections, to facilitate the knowledge between neighbors, and to create a more livable place to stay, even if it's for short-term time.
I just wanted to add very shortly that just one example from Ghent, the city where I grew up in, that most of the social housing neighborhoods right now, they are being renovated. So a lot of big high towers are being destroyed, and new lower rise buildings are being put in place. And that's a good thing. But then again, you see that a lot of the original inhabitants, some of them have to leave because, yeah, the buildings are being destroyed. So temporarily they have to leave. And you always see this tension and protest groups that are, I don't know how it is in other countries, but in my city, you see a lot of protest groups, and they know this is our neighborhood and stuff. So I think you should do both. You should serve both people who want to stay and do something with that. And it's young people as well as old people, but also if people want to leave, and so you should also be aware of that. So I just wanted to give an example that it's not because you renovate the buildings, that's not enough. That's what I wanted to say. I don't know if I make myself clear here.
I respond to that because I think as a student, I lived in a neighborhood in Amsterdam, which was a bit of a deprived neighborhood, and there was a project, and they would put students in there. They would get priority housing, but also get a discount in exchange for 8 to 10 hours of work in the neighborhood, like social work, and actually building bridges between all the new neighbors. And I recognize what you say is that these developments can be really nice, and we really try to include people that have been living there for a long time and creating opportunities. And at the same time, we realize from the ground that not all people were that involved or invested, and wouldn't be, because if they were to move, or if they want to move, they don't have the same opportunity and the same chance to find a place in the same area. And I think if you build these new buildings, you're always going to have a group of people that don't have as much chance to stay and remain there, whereas the higher income people do. And I think that's a bit of the difficulty. Also, we also had these kind of protests there a lot, and I could really understand, because although they said it's for everyone, it's inclusive, you still see that they cannot afford these new houses. So eventually they will be driven away, or if they move from their parents, they cannot stay in the neighborhood where they have strong ties. Yeah, so I sort of recognize what you're saying from the project I was doing. That's what I wanted to say. Yeah.
I would like to react on that because there's some irony in that as well. If we want to create an inclusive neighborhood, what we generally do is inviting people with a lot of cultural capital, economic capital into the neighborhood actually for a discount, and I can skip the line, to make it an inclusive space. And that is also experience from the neighborhood from within. This is seen as something unheard of, especially because there's not much possibilities generated to move out for young people, for example, that are in the same situation but that lack the same cultural capital. So again, the first question about the supply of housing and creating inclusive neighborhoods is linked there.
Yeah. And I wonder if there's not like an ethical consideration as well when talking about the youth, because we're somehow combining access to housing for youth in general, which would include also simply youth getting access to a place where they can live independently from their parents, let's say. At the same time, we also have to consider access to housing in a more basic rights level for people really requiring a place to live. So isn't there a bit of an ethical consideration here, Maria?
Yeah, I think that young people share, of course, with other components of the population, general population, some problems in accessing housing, affordable housing, and so they, I mean, they are in. They should be not a specific target, but they are together with the others asking for affordable housing in cities. But at the same time, I think they experience some specificities. So their demand for housing has some specificities because they usually have short-term job contracts because maybe they have more flexible needs, maybe someone, because they, for example, in Italy, they access to other welfare measures and also to public and social housing with more difficulties than other components or other parts of the population. So of course they have to be as I mean,
minority.
Yeah, they have some some problems that are specific to their situation. So I think we should and we can think of specific policies targeted to youth to access housing. But of course, probably the solution would be to have a welfare that is more universal as possible.
Barrett, yeah, because I mean, it probably is a priority indeed, but it may still have an impact on the community, on the people living in these neighborhoods.
But why would it be ethical?
Why wouldn't it be?
Well, if I rephrase the last panel, just do it. We need to start building for vulnerable groups. And actually, it's not a real distributional issue. It's framed like that to keep people out of better neighborhoods, I would say. But granting people a home of their own, in the end, really saves also social benefits for the municipality. People are able to start their lives independently, to meet their neighbors, to make new contacts, start working. And we see that happening in the housing concepts we have, such as Startblok Riekerhaven, where refugees and regular young people live together. They enter the labor market at the earlier age. They're not dependent on social benefits. In the end, it is in the public interest to house people. So it is only a fake distributional issue.
Yeah, reaction.
No, I agree with the idea on that. Just do it. And at the same time, if you look at reality, we have a shortage of housing, so we cannot just do it. And I think that's and still, I do think we should aspire to this, right? I'm not saying that if you talk about inclusive housing and inclusivity, it's all very conceptual, and it's all the question, what is inclusivity? And once we've defined it, there's going to be one group excluded if you talk about providing houses and helping everyone. And at the same time, I do think, even though these questions are difficult and maybe not grounded that much in the real world at the moment, we should aspire towards it. And in that sense, I think we should build. I do think that having these projects focused on young people like the one I was doing. Like I got priority housing and I'm highly educated and not a precarious young person in general. And the same is like we have a lot of temporary contracts for young people in the Netherlands. So we try to create all these systems to help young people because we see that they don't have opportunities anymore. And at the same time, it does, if going back to your first question, raise the question, how does that relate to the right to housing and sustainable housing on the long term? Because if you have a temporary contract and you have to move again, where then do you go if there's no house available? So I do think sometimes I would like to start more from the assumption and the base being like, we're starting from the fundamental right to housing and going to think of solutions there instead of think of these projects and concepts that might help. Whereas if we all agree like, okay, we have a fundamental right to housing and how are you going to do that? We have a different discussion and I think also different solutions.
Thank you. I love what you are all saying. I just wanted to add one thing that you have to think on short term and on long term, and it's very important to on the long term to keep on building and start it right now and think also about inclusivity and stuff. But also on short term, I mean, this is a matter of life and death. This people are dying now, as the lady said in the beginning. We are in the middle of a housing crisis. People are dying. Yeah. So I mean, in my city, it's a small city, 300,000 people. Okay, but 1% has no home. 3,000 people, they have no home. A boy of 17 years old, 2 years ago, he froze to death in a tent. I mean, this is short-term stuff we need to solve immediately. This is not possible in a Western democracy that people can live on the street and we just let it happen. I mean, when at the same time so many buildings are empty and I mean, this is another discussion, I know it, but at the same time, it's a matter of life and death. So yes, as you said, we should do it now and on the short term as well as long term.
Okay, thank you. An important plea. Does this raise any questions or comments? Yes, I do. Yeah.
Thank you. Eduardo from Barcelona. I actually had a question for Filipa from the last session, which actually I think, and I can also bring to this panel, which has to do with the fact that when we ask the youth to take a more protagonistic role in finding solutions to the housing crisis, we also find ourselves in a position where we're asking them to spend time and resources, to create this new housing. And many times we end up having youth who are middle class to higher class with high capital being very involved, but the youth that we were really hoping would get involved not having enough resources that they can put into these endeavors. So how do we make sure that when we ask the youth to take on a more leadership role, we're inclusive in that as well, in the process of having them take this more protagonistic role? Thank you.
Very good question, and I'll actually also get Filipa to answer that afterwards. But I mean, just who would like to try and take that one on board? I think Barend could have some interesting ideas.
Well, it makes me think about the idea of advocacy planning. That is one of the ideas behind planning in general, that we as a professional community should be the protagonists for people who cannot take care of themselves or cannot voice their needs properly. At Lieve de Kei, for example, we are working with a youth board right now, and we see the same thing. We invite young people to think along what kind of policies we should implement. But again, they are mostly higher educated, they are mostly middle class. Yes, we are happy there are some vulnerable youngsters who have made time to participate. But we should realize they have much more stress than the rest of the population because they're just dealing with surviving. We cannot expect them to design a new housing block, but we can do it for them and take into account their needs. So I would say it's up to you guys.
Yeah, and I would slightly disagree with that, to be honest, because I think I think we often think we know the answers, and the way in which we try to reach out to people, and especially young people, is very much through our frames of understanding and our language. And if you do more participatory projects on the floor, and you get to know these more informal routes towards people, they often have very good ideas, but it's just the way that we structure it, and it's a much more messy process to do it. And it's the way that we structure our organizing groups and inviting people. It's through email, and I don't know, it's not, you don't get the same people or the people that you want. And I do think you're right, there are a lot of people that are not in a position to think about it, but I think there's more people than we often realize, and we don't know how to reach out to them properly, and that's when we start thinking for them instead of with them.
But I didn't say we shouldn't listen.
I'm sorry.
Okay, but it's just how do we hear? How do we hear? Actually, I think it's a really great question. So Fatih and Maria Chiara, no, please go ahead. Very short.
Very short. So yeah, of course, the neighborhoods, they're full of talent. I mean, all the footballers from the national teams, they come from those neighborhoods. I'm just saying that the participatory process is very important, and it should not be like this fake participation, because a lot of processes they call participatory are not participatory at all. So it should be genuine, organic participation process, and of course they can give a lot of information on how to design these buildings, and all generations, not only young people, they can give so much wisdom to architects and designers and builders, and of course they can be involved in a very active way and be compensated for it, not just use their knowledge. I mean, it should be validated as well.
Thank you. Maria Chiara?
In my opinion, first of all, if a young person has a problem of housing, first of all, you have to try to give an answer to that problem. And then you can try to start a participatory process with him. That's for the most vulnerable. I think if they have to think to other ordinary daily problems, it's very difficult to engage them in a process that needs time and resources. So for example, what we try to do is to work with people who are inhabitants already, so who stay in our flats, and to try to give them opportunities to empower and to participate in the processes.
Thank you. I'll also ask Philippa a quick reaction.
Thank you. Just to say, so it's a very good question with an excellent panel. It's very interesting when you try to open, and I've tried to open, when you have new units or new houses and you try to open just for the people of the neighborhood. We call this in Lisbon sons and daughters of the neighborhood. Everybody yells, no, you're not being inclusive. You need to open to everybody. You need to open to everybody. That's really, you're closing the doors. You cannot open the houses just for the people of the neighborhood. Okay, you cannot do this. And then if you open the houses for everybody, those people are going to be kicked out of the neighborhood. And this is a really hard question, because I think we need to preserve the people who are there if they have a very strong identity, like you were talking about, because this is it's the social fabric is as important as the physical fabric of the city. And you need to preserve this, but you also need to open up. So I think, and that's why we set up the social project for our cooperative challenge. I think if we ask people to have a social project that is ingrained in the fabric of the neighborhood, they need to know the neighborhood very well. And it's going to shine through if they have people from the neighborhood in the cooperative. That's what I think. It's going to shine through because they know what the site needs. But let's see if this is a path. But it is a very difficult challenge.
Thank you, and an important one to create this sense of inclusion. So thanks for that question. That was a really great one. Do we have another comment or question in the audience? Has this panel triggered any reaction? No questions, no comments. You sure? Okay, so let me then go for a final wrap up. And I'm a bit tough with the 30-second one, but anyway, we're going to try it, How do we wrap up something like this in 30 seconds? It's almost impossible. But I'll try and ask you to come up with a single most decisive factor for social housing to be as inclusive and as empowering for young people as possible. The single most decisive factor for this social housing model. What will it be? 30 seconds. Who should we start with? Fatih, do you feel ready for this one? I keep throwing these horrible challenges at you.
No, it's okay. I think I already answered that one in the beginning. We need a good cooperation between the different levels of policy making and the housing organizations and the people on the ground, the social workers, and the residents. I mean, it's just we need a better cooperation between all the levels on macro level, meso level, and micro level. I mean, I think that's very clear. And also, I'm gonna let some alarms go off here because people are going to say, "Oh my God, we have a populist in the house." But I just wanted to say that, yeah, a lot of people that are making the decisions on social housing and stuff, let them live for 1 year in a social housing project. Yeah. And then we'll say, I know it's populist. I know
it's also very inclusive.
There is some proof in it.
Yeah, I mean, on the macro, they sit on the throne. You know, they think housing associations locally can solve all the problems. Patty, thanks a lot. You were a great candidate. The single most decisive factor.
I also think policy and working together in between the regions is very important, but I think what is missing, so I would name that as the single most important factor, is that you have committed and involved people in neighborhoods that are willing to do something and create and form the network there. So the relation between the formal and the informal, see if you can strengthen that.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Eka, for your contribution. You were a great panelist. Thank you. Martin.
I would start with housing policies on the local and the national level that strengthen the public interest towards or vis-a-vis market power. So regulate the land market or intervene in the land market, regulates the rents, make it possible for us as housing associations and partners to do the right thing.
Thank you so much, Baron. You were a great panelist as well. And we finish with Maria Clara.
To me, the key point is that housing policies should be integrated in more general welfare policies at national and local level.
Okay, wonderful. You are all great panelists. Thank you so much for your direct contributions. I will now ask you to leave the stage because we have this crazy marathon of panels. By the way, in terms of breaks, what I suggest is that we'll continue, okay? But if you want to just stand up at one point and stretch, you can do that as well. I mean, don't feel like it's a 4-hour movie that you have to just sit and can't move. You know, you can stand up. Like we're relaxed here, okay? So we can absolutely do that in a more relaxed environment. You can you can dance, but I'm feeling that maybe like a 5-minute break would be useful. Okay, that's fine. Let's have a 5-minute break. We'll be back at 10:30. No, sorry, what am I talking about? No, 11:30. Sorry, 11:30 finish time. Okay, please bear in mind that this is a very short break, okay? Please bear that in mind. I think 11:30 might be a bit ambitious, but 11:35 absolute max.
Se calhar também vou que é para depois sairmos daqui direto.
Ja. Ser du inte mig? Nej, det är svårt. Du är det? Ja.
Finland, you're right, okay. All
started. If you can gradually take a seat. Yeah, please come in, come in, come in. Take your seat.
But I don't know where when you see it, oh, I'm going to go with you.
Just about to start. Yep. Oh no, it's fine. Welcome back. Oh, no. It's the last call. Okay, the last call. Okay, the absolute last call. Okay, thanks for your patience. That was a tough call, you know, when you go for the break at that point. But at one point, it's also the audience who tells you, you know, what they want. You know, it's part of this participatory process that we're trying to put in place. And I'm all up for breaks. You know, it's all fine. But as Ben mentioned, it's true that here we want to talk about digital as well. We've talked about inclusive, we've talked about sustainable and affordable, but there's another big change that's occurred in the last couple of years is this extreme digitalization of our lives, of our social lives, of our professional lives. You know, it seems we spend our lives on digital. And this is probably also something that's affecting the social housing landscapes. And this is what we'll be dealing with here, the metaverse in real life neighborhoods, a chance to connect, mingle, and co-create. And I am joined on the panel by Ian Wright from the Disruptive Innovators Network, or the director of that network. We have Samuli Kihlström, Managing Director of NAL Asunnot here in Finland, and Lucie Lescud, International Affairs Project Manager at Paris Habitat. So welcome to the three of you. Now, with this whole extreme lockdown, okay, that we've witnessed in the last couple of years due to the COVID pandemic, everyone's had to sort of rediscover their way of living. And I imagine this would have had a specific burden or a specific pressure for people living in social housing. So can you just tell us, let's start with that. I can't do this panel or even this event without talking about lockdowns, right? It's impossible. Lockdowns have been so decisive and traumatic. So what kind of pressures have these extreme lockdowns given on people living in social housing, and what kind of expectations do people have in social housing now have when it comes to access to digital tools, digital infrastructure, digital services? Samuli, can we start with you? As we're in Finland, the host country, I think it's fair that we start with you.
Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, good morning, and thank you for the possibility to be here in this panel. It's a great honor. Just very quickly, what the NAL Asunnot, or if you want to translate NAL Apartments does, we are a non-profit company that offers houses for young adults under 30 years. Roughly 2,000 apartments in 16 cities at the moment here in Finland. Well, coming back to your question, yes, it has been very extreme years, these couple of years. For our lucky, it has been that we have been, let's say, fairly digitalized before the COVID. So we have broadcasts or the free networks in all our properties already. We have already booking systems for our properties like saunas and gyms and things like that. But what especially our tenants has been missing last couple of years is actually the possibility to meet, possibility to go to the gym in the property, possibility to have a barbecue fest in the property. So they actually haven't been missing that much about the digital things and tools. They have been missing possibility to meet and mingle.
Thank you. Lucy.
Yes, so I'm going also to present a bit my company. So Paris Habitat, it's a public social housing association linked to the city of Paris. And we manage 125,000 housing units in Paris. And for us, well, also the lockdown measures were a very difficult time because usually we rely a lot on our local staff to communicate with our tenants. And we have, for example, 22 local agencies, which are places where tenants can come in if they have any problem, if they have to do any administrative procedure, but also for social counseling. And these places where the local agencies were completely closed during the first lockdown. So we had to use other means to stay, to keep the connection with our tenants. And we did not really have in place digital tools that would allow us to deal with rental management and housing management, etc. So actually, a lot of it was done over the phone. A lot of our activities moved over the phone. But one thing that didn't change during the lockdown is that we have almost one building caretaker for 100 inhabitants, and our building caretakers actually kept working during the pandemic, throughout the pandemic. So it was really important for tenants, especially those who are most isolated, because we also see that is an issue. We have a lot of people who are isolated. I have to say it's a problem that affects a lot our elderly tenants, but not only. So yes, these were some of the difficulties that we faced, and also regarding our tenants, of course, for a lot of people, it was a very difficult time also economically, because a lot of people were not able to work as they were before the pandemic. So that's also something that we had to deal with. But actually the digitization of our services was already something that we were thinking about before the pandemic. So I can't really say that the pandemic was really the trigger for that, but obviously now we are continuing our efforts and trying to digitalize some of our services. Yeah.
Thank you. It's a slightly different reality to the one in Finland. So it's interesting to get a bit of diversity. Ian.
Thank you, Joel. I don't manage any houses. That's me up there, Ian Wright, but I have worked in social housing for coming up for about 40 years, and we now run an innovation network for UK social housing providers. And the reason why it was established was because actually the pace of change and digitization and innovation in social housing was glacial. And I thought, if there's one thing I want to sort of do is to try and accelerate that. And my question back to the sector as a result of the pandemic was, why does it take a global pandemic for us to start to thinking digital and start to drive change? Because for me, the tenants and residents who live in our homes, they don't compare us against other landlords, or so they compare us against other service providers who have been miles ahead of us in terms of providing digitization and getting online. I think the other thing as well is to understand the difference between digitization and digital transformation. There is a difference. Digitization is taking an existing process and putting it online, building an app or a portal, for example. If your process is pretty poor or not very good, all you're doing is moving that process online. Digital transformation is very, very different to that and takes a bit more effort. I think the other thing that we noticed during the pandemic was that a lot of communities, certainly in the UK, did not necessarily need their landlords to come together to use digitization. They used other platforms such as, Facebook, local communities, WhatsApp groups. So, let's not assume that tenants and residents are always waiting for the landlords to come in and do things. Communities will do these things themselves. But I think from a social housing provider perspective, we no longer have the excuse of saying, we're going to digitize our services, it's going to take us 18 months or 2 years. You look at how quickly landlords were able to get people out working remotely, in some cases probably within a week. We don't have that excuse anymore of saying, well, actually, we've got to prepare a business case, a business strategy, investment strategy. In this digital age, things are moving very quickly. So I think we expect them to sort of get on. Yeah.
And on these expectations then, does the youth have a very high level of expectation when it comes to the digitalization of these services, without necessarily talking about digital transformation, but at least digitization? What is the situation? I imagine, again, it will probably vary a lot by country or by perspective. Can we start then with Paris, with France?
Yes, of course. So for us, it's a bit difficult to really answer this question because we don't really have a dialogue policy that is targeted specifically at young tenants. So it's a bit difficult to answer the question of exactly what their needs are. So for example, we started a process of digitization. So that is moving some of our services online. And for this process, we had participative workshops with tenants. But actually, as we were saying before, maybe the ways in which we were reaching out to tenants tended to attract, in general, older people. And for example, people who are retired, who actually have more time to come to our offices and do some tests with us, etc. So it was a bit difficult to get an idea of really what were the needs of young people. But what we do know, it comes from the feedback we get actually from our building caretakers and our local agencies, who are the ones who are really face-to-face with the tenants on a daily basis. And what they report is that a lot of younger tenants and or other, not just younger tenants, but tenants who are more comfortable with digital tools often feel a bit frustrated that they have to come into an office to do something really simple, a really simple procedure. And so they wish that they had access to they had the possibility of doing that online, because also for example, the local office opening hours are not very convenient for someone who is working or studying. So that is another problem. And that was one of the reasons that drove us to start this digitization process. We are really at the beginning of it. So for now, we only have a few functions, a few features available, but we are planning to expand it more and more. So, and this is with the idea of giving people more autonomy to manage their housing unit. So yes, that's from the perspective from Paris.
Okay, no, but that's interesting. And then if we go to Finland, are we on the kind of other end of the spectrum here? Could you talk a bit about what is the standard expectation when it comes to access to digital tools, and are there still some expectations ahead, especially from the youth?
Well, I would say that since most of our tenants are almost lived their whole life so that they have been able to use a mobile phone, or they are basically diginative already. So they are expecting basically that everything can be done mobilely or somehow digitally. So I would say that the expectations are high. And what we have done is that basically there is only one single thing that you have to do physically during your tenancy, is that you're coming to get the keys from the office. afterwards, everything else as said. For example, you can book the sauna from the from your mobile phone, or
not something
from
you can do in Paris.
No, no.
or your laundry room. You can leave your fault or disturbance report by net. So they are, I would say that they're demanding and expecting easier and easier ways to live. And if I'm answering your question, yes, they are demanding also.
But did you have still a sense of something that's not quite functioning yet, but that would be an expectation for the future?
Of course, there is a lot. What comes with, for example, the communications and things like that.
Okay.
Definitely.
Yeah. So, yeah, Ian, I mean, do you see Finland as a bit of an outlier here in this social housing space?
Not if you can book a sauna online, I don't. I would love to have that in social housing. I think there's a couple of observations from me. First of all, I wouldn't necessarily have a distinction between young people's expectations and tenants and residents' expectations. I think they're probably one and the same thing. I don't think we understand them very well. And I would come back to what some of the previous panelists is, are we actually listening? Do we really go out and sort of talk? Are there any fans of Japanese crime drama in the audience? Anybody watch TV? Japan? Really good. There's a lesson to take back around this. There's a Japanese word for scene of the crime is gemba. And basically their belief is you can't actually understand the problem that you're looking to solve unless you've been out at the scene of the crime. So quite often I will ask my members, and particularly the chief execs or the directors, say, how many times in the last 3 months have you been out and actually walked a tenant's or a resident's problem yourself? Because the further or the higher up you go, the less you have a more strategic view, so you can see the bigger picture, but you have less understanding of what is actually happening on the ground. And I would probably say from an expectations perspective, what we're all looking for is a 24/7 on service, frictionless, i.e. I don't get frustrated when I'm trying to find out an answer to something, but also that it just works. It's interesting, I think in the previous panel, the panel before that, so we talked about the housing crisis. Certainly in the UK, we've had a housing crisis for at least 20 years. I don't know how you can call something a crisis and let it go on for 20 years, to be honest. But I think we have got to spend more time understanding not just the needs of people, but people's expectations. One of my partners in the business is Apple. You probably have a lot of you have an Apple product, whether it's an Apple phone or an iPad. How many of you have actually looked at the user manual to understand how to use that particular product? You don't. You just dive in, and and that's the whole basis, that everything is designed to be really, really simple. And I would probably challenge most of us to go into our housing organisations and let's fill in a housing application and see how easy it is and frictionless it is, and whether we're meeting the expectations of our customers.
And not only do you not dive in, but you also just accept everything without looking at what you're accepting. And it's true that there is this potential for digital transformation, but they're a little bit like two models, let's say. You were talking about the way tenants will already have created their groups, their WhatsApp groups and all this. And at the same time, Lucy was saying, the importance of the caretaker who has the contact with the community. And these are almost like two, I mean, I'm sure they can run in parallel, but let's say they're two opposite models. How do you see digital tools moving forward in helping to create this sense of shared ownership, this sense of community? Is this something that you should be active in, or you should rather just let people, live their lives freely? Lucy.
So for us, I would say, for now, that's not really something that we have experience with. I mean, we do have, as the other panelists were saying, we have a lot of tenants who create their own Facebook groups. Sometimes also the building caretaker will actually be the one to create a WhatsApp group for the tenants to communicate some information. But yeah, what I can see in general is that in our tenant involvement strategy, it's very hard to, I mean, with the way we are currently doing it, it's really hard for us to reach young people. So, for example, we work a lot with tenants associations and representatives, for example, from tenants association sit on our board. we have a lot of meetings with them to try to understand a bit, I mean, to get their input into our projects. But yeah, the average participant in tenants association is actually someone who is quite older, and so young tenants are not really reached by this kind of dialogue strategy. So I think maybe there is an opportunity for digital tools to come in and because it is something that is quite natural, I think, for young people to use. But we really have to think about how we want to do it. Because, for example, we could imagine having an app or something where tenants could vote on certain things. We tried that actually with one project, but it was on something really specific. It was for a refurbishment project, and we asked tenants to vote on the color of a staircase. So, of course, that is really nice, but
did they have options of colors, or could they freely throw colors at you?
That's a good question. But yeah, I think we should also have more open questions and be, I don't know, have a bit broader questions that we ask. And I think for that, the in-person conversations are still really important.
Yeah, it probably won't happen without the in-person conversations, but maybe there's some ground that you can break online. In Finland, given the fact that you have all this infrastructure and a strong cultural adoption of digital tools, do you see then tenants actively getting organized to give feedback on their living conditions, on things that they would like for the future, on decisions that would need to be taken? Do you see that kind of thing happening?
I'm fairly lucky position to say that our tenants are fairly active. What I mean that we have roughly 2,500 tenants at the moment. And when we are asking, for example, to give a feedback for us twice a year, we are able to get roughly 500 answers. So it is fairly okay level what comes with answering to the questions. And yes, there are, because tenants are nowadays, or also the young tenants are fairly demanding. They also are saying what they need, what is wrong, what they want. So yes, we are able to get also great ideas from there. And just quickly to say that, for example, we have a group of 12 persons group, which are our tenants. They are connected to planning our new properties. So they are meeting the architects and things like that. So we are really trying to get as much as possible information from our tenants.
And on this planning phase, then are there interesting projects, Ian, maybe, I mean, as you're trying to disrupt the sector, are there interesting projects in terms of planning where you're using digital tools to, I don't know, imagine social housing models of the future, experimenting with things online? I mean, what's out there?
I think first of all, it's understandable these are complex issues that we're dealing with. So there's not going to be one simple sort of answer to this. And technology for me will always be the last bit that you would actually deploy. When I was a social housing tenant, I didn't want anything to do with my landlord. If something went wrong, I wanted somewhere to go to and experience. But most of the time, I just wanted to get on with my life. And I suggest that most people probably in that sort of position as well. I think it's a bit lazy to expect that actually technology will suddenly provide all of the answers that you're looking for as a landlord. I think sort of Lucy's point is, you've got people out there on the ground, whether it's caretakers or your housing officers, they talk to people. It amazes me that, and correct me if I'm wrong if it's different in Europe, but when we employ people, we employ good people. When we bring them on board or induct them, when they're starting work in an organization, that we don't for their first week, they're not actually out in the properties and on the estates talking to the tenants and residents who are there. Whether you work in a contact center or you work in finance or you work in some other part, to understand what on earth it is that we are there to sort of deliver. But there are tools out there. What I would probably say is that there are no such things as opaque organizations now. Every landlord in this room, you're going to have to build a glass organization, because within your organization, if people are not happy with what you're doing, or something that you've done wrong, or they're not happy with the values, that will get out there. And with what's happening with social media now is that gets amplified, and people will start to pick on problems. This house is not in very good condition, or I've had very, very poor service here. And I think we're not awake to that yet. But yes, there are some really good engagement platforms out there. I think the other final thing to say is that what digital has done is it's given everybody a voice. Okay, everybody has a voice now, and there are lots of different channels that you can tap into. And what your job and what your role is as a landlord is to make that invisible voice visible to your policymakers and to your executive, so you understand what's happening. We talk a lot in our organization about weak signals, things that are down here that are not in the mainstream media yet. That, as you as leaders, that's what your role is, to be out there to understand what those weak signals are, where things are failing, where service standards are dropping, and actually get in very quickly and solve them.
Okay, and so that's talking about the more open feedback loop. I mean, we've talked about groups that can get organized online to give closed feedback within a community, but what happens when it hits the broader public, through social media? Can you talk a bit about that experience? Have you already had or witnessed or experienced a negative or positive feedback on social media that has, forced you to do something or forced you to adapt? That would be also interesting. Lucy.
So yes, regarding social media, for us, it's an important part of our communication strategy. So our communications team uses Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and actually, to be really honest, the tenants tend to engage with us on social networks, mostly to point out problems. So that's something that is not in itself, it's not completely negative, because sometimes it allows us to identify the problems and, to identify that in this building, there is something wrong and we need to fix it. But yeah, on the other hand, it's a bit difficult to create some more positive interactions with our tenants through social media. So there was a question, and also, yeah, we could think that with social media it could be a way to engage younger tenants, but that's not so much the case in our experience. So we are also asking the question of do we need to use some different social networks that are used by a younger audience, like TikTok and stuff like that. So that we're not doing that yet, but we're.
And can you go to TikTok if you don't yet master Instagram? All such complicated questions, Samuli, this open feedback loop, is that something you've experienced?
Yes, we have an answering for you. First of all, we have a TikTok channel nowadays, and we are using it for making short videos there, just to, for example, how to recycle and things like that. So it works. Young adults in Finland are very keen about TikTok, and the second channel what they're using here in Finland is a Yodel. And I have to say that there is areas where there's a group of Yodel users, and then some of our properties even has an own Yodel channel where the tenants are, and it's the channel where the most negative matters will be said. And we are, of course, monitoring it, and we are able to get the most negative matters from that channel. And what does it mean? Sometimes we have to send a maintenance person on site or things like that.
Okay. I'll give you some practical examples to go away and sort of have a look at around this in terms of sort of the digital technologies. I think in terms of social media, again, that comes back to my point, everybody's now got a voice. We have a growing social housing activist sort of community coming through, and one young guy, 23-year-old, he's probably got more Twitter followers, and I haven't looked on Instagram in terms of that. He's probably got more Twitter followers in the UK than most of the landlords, actually probably all of the landlords combined in the UK, and we've got 1,500. So what you're finding is that when they're going in and finding issues or service failures, it immediately gets amplified. Okay, and this is no longer a weak signal. This is here now. It will probably start to happen in other communities as well. So we need to be aware of that. I think that the second thing is how do you use digital technologies to actually help people? Because ultimately, that's what social landlords are here to do. You are here to help to solve a problem around this. We had an interesting experiment whereby we used digital technology, video technology, to actually identify and repairs. And so basically all that happens is somebody comes in, phones in, we send them a link to their mobile phone, they click on that link, and then through their smartphone, they can direct us to where the toilet is leaking or where the light has failed, things like that. So you get a right first time sort of fix around that. You think that's really, really good, but actually when these technologies are deployed is when you start to find the issues come out. And what we found with that experiment was that whilst that was really good from a landlord's perspective, the tenants didn't like the landlords having a look around their homes and seeing inside their homes. So what we thought would be a good idea to help improve the service experience was not that in favour from the tenant's perspective.
Interesting and important to bear in mind the power, the negative power of social media potentially, something to be monitoring. Sorry, okay. Are there any questions or comments from the audience on these digital aspects? So we have one up here. I'm gonna rush up. And I hope no one will take it badly if we finish maybe 5, maximum 10 minutes later than the scheduled time.
Hello, everybody. I am from Tenants Organization. I am in France, the CNL. I have 2 small remarks and questions for the panel. To have more flats in France, there is a special law. The law obliges the city to build, the big city to build 30% of social housing. What do you think about it? Because it could be nice for everybody, and it could be nice for the young people too. And the second question, especially was for this panel, how we can work better with the tenants organization about this subject. Thank you very much.
Okay. Does anyone want to first react on the attribution to social housing? I don't know if Lucy wants to have a quick reaction to that one.
Yes, I think you're talking about the 30% mandatory social housing. It's a policy. So when there is a new project of, I don't know, I think it's 800 meters, square meters or more, you have to build, actually the private developers have to build 30% of social housing. So yes, I also agree that it's a good policy, but I don't know if there's something similar in other countries.
Maybe just a very quick
yes, there is.
Okay.
Yes, there is.
Percentages?
20.
Yeah, about 20. Okay, so 30 would be even a little bit more. We have a question. Sorry. No, before we go there, on the tenants associations, Ian, do you have any experience with that one?
Yeah, it's what we've been saying. And actually, it's if you're out there in the communities and you are a community landlord, you should be engaged with your tenants and residents, not just the formal tenants and residents organizations. It's those sort of other groups of people who live in your properties, as well as Lucy sort of talked about. The mix, making sure you're getting a right mix of people and not just people who put themselves forward. As I say, other service providers outside of housing are very, very good at engaging with communities. We do a lot of work with IKEA, and they are very, very good at talking to their customers and understanding what their problems are. And I keep referring to that. Do you understand what your tenants and residents' problems really are?
One more reaction? Well, we're good? Okay, we have another question at the back. Yep. Yep.
Now it's working. Thanks. I'm Veronica Selmark and I'm from Sweden, and I'm a board member of the Swedish Union of Tenants. And before, I used to be the president in the Swedish student movement, so I was very engaged in the student housing accommodation. And the structure for the organization is that the board members actually consist of students. But I also been engaged in the youth housing movement in Sweden. And then I could see that the board members for landlords that construct housing for youth, they are not really having as many youth at the board as the student part of the housing politics. So I was thinking about this discussion about digitalization, and I think Lucie from Paris mentioned that you had this project working group of youth that you can contact and they could get involved and, you know, provide feedback to the landlord. But that is, when I'm thinking about this, that's youth participation. But I haven't really heard about youth inclusion. The inclusion part would be that the youth gets as much power as the older people get, and the power to actually be in decision-making power in the board and to be a part of the strategy on how to work with youth more long-term, and not only, you know, when the structure is basically almost decided already. And I'm not addressing this to you specifically. I just got the idea when I heard about you speaking about it. So I think that the takeaway from this would be to include youth much more in the board and in the decision-making powers among the landlords, and that if it's not possible, you know, to have as many youth as you really need, and you need more than one or two in the board to actually get, you know, the ideas out, then you could expand the number of seats in the board. And that's also a structural problem and a structural way of solving the problem. So I think that youth inclusion is something that many landlords lack when it comes to this decision making, and that is one of the key stones to solve the problem. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I mean, here it's really a question about governance. I would say maybe a very quick reaction then on you know, should we have more youth represented in the governance?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. So I don't know how we could put it into practice concretely, so I don't really have a solution, but yeah, I agree with your point of view. I think it would be good for young people to be represented also in governance, the same way we have tenant representatives in our board and employees. I think that would be a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I can continue. Thank you. Actually, we have 7 persons in our board, and 2 of those are our tenants. So we already have 2 youngsters in our board, and those are selected by the tenant committees.
Yeah, just a point for me, governance is more about than just your formal structures. And if I was a young person, do I want to sort of sit through a 3-4 hour board meeting to sort of, you know, no, I want to be getting on with my life. So you've got to find different creative, innovative structures to involve young people that is right for them. If we try and fit them into what our governance structures are, I don't think we're going to get as much out of them as what we would want to.
Okay, thank you. And we'll be, we have one more. Okay, okay, you're pushing me a little bit, but let's go for, oh my goodness, 3. Okay, it's going to have to be very quick. Okay, no, that's not.
Yeah, okay, so very short. Maybe when you said you don't know how to put it into practice, I'm active in the arts sector, in the arts branch. And in my city, in art center I work for, we have this thing. You have the boards, the regular boards, and next to that you have the young boards. In Birmingham, there's also an art center where they do the same. We learned it from Birmingham, so that could be one of the. Just wanted to help you with the elaboration.
Okay, thank you. We have one more, just 2 rows before or ahead.
Yeah, well, so I would like to ask you, relate a little bit digital technologies with the topic of evaluation, of monitoring or post-occupancy evaluation. So are you using any tools or mechanisms using digital technologies, for example, sensors or other kinds of tools to see the energy efficiency, the performance, the user satisfaction of the buildings?
Yeah, I'll answer that. I'm actually meeting with somebody from Finland this afternoon from Scenario Labs, which is a very, very good startup sort of tech company. There's another one in the Netherlands called Spotter that we're working with. And these are all digital companies who basically are able to assess the performance of buildings without any disturbance to any of the tenants or residents. So rather than people going into the buildings, we can look at things. I think the final thing to sort of finish on is how many sensors does a normal family car have? Microprocessors. That's about 3,000. Even in the very, very best smart homes, which is what we like to think that we build, it has less than 100. Your garage knows more about your car than we do about your home.
Okay, and we have one final one here.
Yes, smaller remark. My name is Ben Pluim. I'm chairman of European Federation for Living, which is the network, European Network Social Housing University. I work as a board member also for housing associations, and I can say that the whole digital thing, like also social network, is not the whole story. One of the companies I worked with, we had the habits that as board member, every 3 months, you have to work 1 day on the public desk. And I say, people you see and speak there are not the same people as the people who are active on social media. It gives you a lot of more information.
Thank you very much, and thanks for your participation. I will close with a typical 30-second question. Sorry, I have to. I'd like to go back to the metaverse, actually. And we've all seen, like, you know, this crazy metaverse where you could potentially be in a pretty insalubrious place, but you're imagining this wonderful scenario where you're living in the home of your dreams, right, in the virtual space. My question is this scary or is this great for social housing? Can I start with Lucy? 30 seconds.
So for me, I don't know if it's scary or exciting. It's just for now, it's really difficult to imagine because we are so far from achieving that. We are still struggling to allow people to do basic things online. So I think this is for very, very much later into the future.
Okay, thank you so much, Lucy. A warm round of applause. You are a great panelist sharing your insight. Finally, the metaverse, scary or great?
Something in the middle of that, I would say. A little bit scary, but of course, it gives much possibilities. I think so. And in the future, we are going to see things that we are not even able to imagine at the moment. So I look positively about the matter.
You could even be in a virtual sauna, but quite cold.
No.
No. Okay. Thank you so much, Samuli. You were a great panelist. Thank you.
Okay. I think Mark Zuckerberg was sort of bored one day and has decided to come up with this. I think the issue for housing leaders is actually, do you want to live in the virtual world or do you want to help people in the real world? And we have a lot of people who need some housing, and that's where our focus needs to be.
Thank you so much, Ian. You're a great panelist. Thanks. Thanks to the fantastic panel. You made digital possible, so thank you so much. And now we will turn to our last session, which will be building on actually some of the comments coming from the audience in this one on governance and how do we involve young people. So I would like to invite Sarah Mitten and John Stevens from the Clarion Futures. Sarah is Age-Friendly Communities Manager and John is Partnerships and Project Manager. And at Clarence, they have been working on a youth voice charter for the international housing sector. And we've heard some points being made around how can we, involve the youth? How can we hear the youth? How can we hear their real problems? So I'd like to just ask you to get started on that one. Can you tell us about this charter? And what do you see would be a way forwards to get the youth more involved? Who would like to start?
Shall I start off with that? I'll start off with that because I think there's quite a lot of history to this kind of question and also to us hearing a resident voice as well. And in a sense, I think it goes right far back into our history as well. So Clarion as a housing group was originally set up in 1900s. It was set up by a Victorian philanthropist who set up homes for the working poor in England's industrial towns and cities. And we've gone through a series of mergers, haven't we, over the years? And through our most recent merger, Clarion Futures got set up, and Clarion Futures is a charitable foundation of Clarion Housing Group. We have 4 core aims, and that is to get people into jobs and training, to help people manage their money well, to help people get online, and also to create vibrant communities as well. And I think that one really fits in with the vibrant communities aspect. So there's that around our history, and then there's also a lot around opportunities that emerged as well. So we are part of the European Federation for Living. We came out of the pandemic and we were like, well, what are the ideas? How do we spring back out of this issue? And I think community resilience came out of that quite strongly. And I think the whole idea of kind of resident involvement, resident engagement, hearing resident voices is around building people's, individual skills, individual capacities, which then leads into kind of community resilience. So that's also part of where we came from as well with this.
Yes, and I think, I guess just to add, and it's been so interesting being part of this whole event this morning, is that I think it's really important that when we're talking about young people or the youth, that we're really clear that they're not a homogenous group. And sometimes we do a disservice by segmenting people by age full stop. I think our approach has very much been, how do we support people across a life cycle so that they don't reach crisis at any moment in that kind of in their lifetimes. And for us, it's not just about voice. I think it's about how we empower young people or people of any age and give them the tools and opportunities to take action as well. I think if you only listen, then you're not actually achieving anything. So I think that's been really important for us, and not making any assumptions is kind of really core to that. So we've always been quite creative about how we do listen to youth voice. And I think we've got a community ambassador program. So we give young people in their hyperlocal communities a pot of money and some tools, resources to go out and identify challenges that they face within their neighbourhoods, and then deliver projects. So we really felt like that was a positive model in our communities that we've actually shared with the wider sector. We then have a national ambassador group who I guess are like the youth board for Clarion, who look at issues across the business. So definitely not just within the community investment arm, but what's going on in terms of tenancy sustainment, how we're developing homes, and they come up with projects each year. But I think the bit that we felt was the next step was about, how do we share that, not just with the wider sector in the UK, but how do we learn from social housing across Europe. So we started out by doing a youth exchange programme in partnership with the Commonwealth Society. So we took some young people out to Cyprus a couple of weeks ago. Really have been quite an international jet setter this year for the first time ever. And we also then wanted to look at, well, how do we involve even more voices from across the world? And so we hosted a youth summit in London, and we had young people come from Italy, from Cyprus, from the UK, and from Sweden. And we did an innovation lab. So Ian from the Disruptive Innovators Network would have really loved the sort of process we went through. We used kind of design thinking processes to get all the young people in the room to talk about what challenges they're facing, what ideas they've seen, because nothing is new. There's lots of things going on in this world. Like, what have they seen that really works to get young people listened to? And then as the kind of final output was this first draft youth charter, which we shared yesterday as part of another session, and we're very happy to share it with this room as well. And the kind of 4 key things that the young people in the room decided were the things that were really affecting young people. And I think the thing to say is there was a lot of commonalities. I think young people in Cyprus were facing a lot of the challenges that young people in the UK were facing, similarly Sweden and Italy. So the 4 kind of key areas that young people felt housing associations needed to listen to young people more on were health and well-being, climate change and the environment, and unemployment, and also the cost of living crisis, which I think is, a pandemic in itself at the moment. And so they came up with some key principles, some ideas on how housing associations could do better around these 4 key themes, and some of the things they could put in practice. So very much that action element.
Okay, thank you. And when there was that question related to how do you get all youth in their diversity involved and empowered, because we are not always able to listen to everyone in the community. Was there anything interesting that came out from your exercise there in empowering everyone as opposed to some groups?
I mean, I think it's really tricky, and sadly, you're always going to get the usual suspects that will put their hand up and share their viewpoint. I think for us, it's about like a one size doesn't fit all. We know that we've got to create lots of opportunities for young people to have a say and have a voice. So we, through our community ambassador programme, we have young people kind of within their localities having a say, and we try and feed that into our national ambassadors, and then we try and feed that into our boards. I think a next step for us might be having youth representation on our boards, but I guess to reiterate what Ian said, I think there's a lot that has to happen before that becomes authentic. So we do try and provide lots of opportunities for young people to have a say.
Yeah, and I think with more my kind of research hat on, I think there's a variety of quantitative and qualitative approaches you could take to that. So from a kind of more qualitative approach, we do have a history of bringing everybody together into workshops, and one of the methods that we use is to get a visual facilitator into the room. So that's an artist who will take the visual minutes from the meeting and draw it on the wall while the people are participating in that workshop. And what we find with that is that it's a really good way of engaging with the workshop participants, but then it's also a really good method to use for communicating those voices to other stakeholders that weren't involved in that workshop. And a second, more quantitative approach, we have the Clarion Index, which is our annual resident survey. And that's much more than a survey because we ask about 40 questions in that survey. That survey is a telephone interview. So 2,000 residents a year, 15 minutes of their time. We ask a whole variety of questions in that around feeling of belonging to the neighbourhood, whether people run out of money at the end of each week or each month. And I think what we find from that, particularly the resident voice, is that our young people are really engaged in their communities. They feel like they belong to their communities. But the kind of struggle that young people face is around employment and issues with money, I think, more than anything else. So that's another example. And when we kicked off this work with young people, we actually employed one of your national ambassadors, one of your engaged young residents, to then do a bit of peer research. So she interviewed other young residents in the same situation as her, and she also set up some focus groups as well. And it's really kind of quite shocking, some of the voices that we heard coming through that of people moving into their home just with an airbed, and that was it, no other furniture. And also issues that kind of, feed into some of the challenges that young people face around, maybe they come from a background where there's family breakup or something like that. So young people are left to fend for themselves. So I think that really is the kind of business case for why we work with young people and engage with them as well.
Okay, and in this Housing Europe event, in relation to where you're at now with this charter, giving a voice to the youth in housing, where do you see some next steps or some possible links or desires or expectations for the future?
I mean, I guess the one thing I would say, to be controversial, I think the elephant in the room here is that we don't have young people within this conference having their say, and I think that's really important. So I think one of the things that came out when we first kind of presented the charter yesterday was that what would be really positive is to have a youth-led, developed conference where actually staff come and listen to what young people are saying, and that it's very much shaped by those young people. So I think we're really keen on doing that. We've also been having conversations about how we can have a sort of subsidiary youth network to the EFL, which can always be a kind of touch point for staff across European housing associations.
And I think that kind of co-creation is so important. So I have worked on other charters as well in the past, and one of those was an LGBT charter, so it's called the House Proud Pledge. And that came out of an evidence base. So we had the first presentation here about the importance of building an evidence base, and that I think is really key and vital. So 6 housing providers in the UK formed together. It was the largest study of its kind ever undertaken to understand the issues of LGBT residents. And what came out of that is that residents didn't want us to be tokenistic in our response to it. They wanted housing providers to actively engage and support LGBT residents. So that then developed into the pledge scheme. But I think the fundamental lesson from that was the goodwill that was generated by that work. And And I think that's related to your point, the really key thing here, that if housing providers all work together, you're chipped in a little bit, then that generates a significant amount of goodwill. And we can engage with so many other stakeholders, I think, not just housing providers, but there's a wider audience here of city authorities and bigger organizations. So.
Okay, and as it's the European Year of Youth 2022, maybe this is the ideal opportunity to work on that. So thank you so much. Good luck with the further development of your charter. Thank you so much. A warm round of applause to our colleagues from Clarion. Thank you. So now, I'm sorry, I've eaten up a little bit on at least 10 minutes on your time, but Sorka Edwards, Secretary General of Housing Europe, will now give us her concluding remarks. How can you conclude 3 hours in less than 10 minutes? But that one will be for you.
Sorry, we don't have that much time because the next one is starting at 1 and we need to set up and you're already over time. So
well, indeed, I think the most important point of these conclusions is really to go back to the origins of this conference, which came from a very young person within our team, and that's Diana Jordanova, and to say she really had the vision for this, and she has really managed to create a very vibrant conversation with very different actors in the spirit of the festival. So I found this compostable cloth saying variety is the spice of life, and something for the saunas, which I hope you can relax after what was really amazing effort, I think, from Diana, of course, from all the team, but really coming from. So please, recognition of that. We also speak for Jean-Paul and for all of the speakers, so that you, let's say, you keep this as in your heart. Yeah, thanks to Abderrahim for coordinating that. It also takes this attention to detail and this work. And then this, of course, to mark it so that you don't forget it. But of course, then it's up to us at the Housing Europe team, together with Bent and all the board members, to make sure that this also just isn't a conference that just one more conference, but that really the messages that came through, some very strong messages, ranging from we can't forget that this is a life and death situation, and that it's a challenge that in many cases we are really not meeting. And I think that came through because we invited other voices from outside the sector. And I think it's a really important reality check. So we in the sector, from the social and public affordable housing providers, the cooperatives, are under a lot of pressure. So we see that. So the waiting lists are growing, and yet we are constantly pushing to be more efficient, more digital, and to engage with young people, engage with residents, engage with the macro levels, so our governments. But at the same time, this bigger picture, there are urgent needs out there, and this is why this festival is so important, so that the housing associations come together, we could exchange how to be more effective, more efficient, because that's needed. But we are also reminded of the bigger picture and the numbers of people, especially young people, who are consistently being unfortunately left out of housing without affordable housing. So I think there was really, from the start to the end, some really messages that we just have to really integrate into our work. So we saw at the start that at European level, which is the level we are very active on, we saw the leader of the S&D group, but she's not the only one. There's a growing voice in the European Parliament, which is reflecting the needs on the ground and really wants, she said, basta ya. We heard that from Iranche from the S&D group. Basta ya, we need a change. And it's also the many cross-party recognition of that in the European Parliament. We even heard from the European Youth Coordinator that, again, as Jean-Paul said, it's not just about youth exchanges. It's really to listen to the voices. This is what they've committed to, and to base their actions on real data and evidence at European level. And I think what was revealing today is that many of the organizations here are already listening to those voices in quite structured way. We heard just from the last intervention there, but also throughout the sessions that actually there are structured ways that the youth and users are being brought into this conversation. So we have to bring that message back, say this sector is already doing that, so we can say boost the European year and give it more of a reality check of what the youth are really concerned about, so that they can actually do exchanges. So yeah, it's been I think just another part of a really inspiring festival, and I think for me it was bringing those very clashing and also disagreeing perspectives. So we talked about how urgent this is for some people, but then some organizations dealing with booking a sauna online in social housing. So we know what is possible and we can do this. So let's do it. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to leave relatively quickly.